I actually don't think authentic conservatism is represented in the Republican Party anymore. I think in the past it was the most amenable home to conservatism, but I think that that's no longer the case.
Hello, and welcome to Working with me, Dan Doriani, hosting a podcast where we explore faith, work, culture, and the way believers can make a difference in their corner of the world. Well, friends, I am delighted to introduce today my guest. He's publicly known in his writings as Peter Wehner, but to his friends, Pete Wehner, and I hope we're becoming friends. Pete has been a man who worked in his youth in the George H.W. Bush White House, then the George W. Bush White House, had the role of Deputy Director of Speechwriting for George Bush, and also was the head of the White House Office of Strategic Initiatives for Bush. That sounds like an important role, and he'll tell us a little more about it in a little bit. Right now, and in recent years, he's been a senior fellow at think tanks and research centers, Trinity Forum, above all now, but he's also closely connected, and I believe also a senior fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. I get their emails every week. A lot of good material there. Author of 3 books. I'll mention just 2 of them: City of Man, Religion and Politics in a New Era with Michael Gerson, who's a St. Louisan and known to a lot of my friends before his untimely passing. And then a book I love and recently read and recommend heartily, small books. So if you have an appetite for small, concise, stimulating books, it's called Wealth and Justice, which Pete wrote along with Arthur C. Brooks, who's a well-known author. You're well-known yourself. You are known to many people as an author who writes for The Atlantic and for New York Times as an op-ed. What did I get wrong? What do you want to add? Of course, you've written for many other people. What would you like to add to this little description, Pete?
No, it's a very nice description. I'm no longer affiliated with Ethics and Public Policy Center.
Okay.
I left there to go to the Trinity Forum in 2022, but had 15 years, very good years there. Actually, Ethics and Public Policy Center was the first think tank, or one of the first think tanks I joined when I came to Washington, D.C. when I was in my 20s. I actually came out on an internship from college, University of Washington. And before I started, I worked in the Reagan administration as well. At that point, I was a young writer in my 20s, a speechwriter for William Bennett, who was then Secretary of Education. But before
he gave great speeches, by the way.
Well, he is and was a very bright guy. He got his PhD in political philosophy at University of Texas. He had a great group of people. Bill Kristol was his chief of staff when I was there, and just a lot of other people. It was a very good first foray into government because they took serious ideas seriously. I didn't get the sense then, or really throughout my life in politics, the people that I was fortunate enough to have been surrounded by were not cynical. And
Yes.
It seemed to me they saw politics through the right prism, and all of us are imperfect, but viewed politics as a means to pursue the common good and justice. And
Yes.
especially for a young man, that was a nice thing to see.
Yeah, I love to point out that the phrase common good is a very old one, and we use it a great deal, but the Apostle Paul also cites it in 1 Corinthians 12:7. He says God gives us gifts for the common good, not for our own consumption or advancement. What a privilege to work with men who are seeking the common good.
Yes.
And if I can just go into something I was going to talk about later, Reagan, Bush 1, Bush 2, we could go back a little bit further and talk about Gerald Ford and maybe draw a line between his number one aide and advisor, Henry Kissinger, and views of politics today. There's sort of the city on the shining hill. America leads the world best by moral virtue, by ideas. And then another approach, we could say maybe Kissinger and Trump and his advocates, who'd be more a friend of realpolitik. It's all about power and the exercise of power. I think I know where you stand, but tell us where you stand and why.
Yeah, it's. I think that distinction is a good one. I would put Kissinger in a very different category than Donald Trump, who I think is in many ways sui generis. But there was a debate that was fairly intense in the mid-1970s, and that was really between the approach of Henry Kissinger, who was born in Germany, was shaped by a European approach to international affairs, national security. It was a real balance of power. Tended to downplay the importance of morality, human rights, in foreign policy. And they weren't absent, I would say, from how Kissinger approached things, but they were much more subordinate.
Subdued, we might say.
Yeah, I think so. And Reagan, who challenged Ford in '76, lost and won in 1980. But in the '76 race, where he was trying to take the nomination away from Ford, it was Kissinger that was really the target of Reagan's criticisms. And part of that was identifying and criticizing the realpolitik. And then Reagan, in his presidency, elevated morality and ethics in a way that his predecessors, Ford and Nixon, and if you go back to Eisenhower, really did not. And you saw that, for example, when he gave a speech in 1983, which created quite a kerfuffle at the time, where he referred to the Soviet Union as an evil empire.
Evil empire, right.
It's actually a speech at the National Association of Evangelicals, interestingly enough. So
that presented us as the good empire.
Yes.
Yes, or at least aspiring to be.
Yes. I think
which seemed like a black-white that made a lot of politicians dismayed.
Yes. I think it made them dismayed for both how it presented America and how it presented the Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. I think history has pretty much lent its verdict on that in terms of Reagan being right that it was an evil empire. I think even people on the left who may have criticized Reagan then would concede that. See that now. It's important to add for Reagan and for any other president that makes morality a centerpiece of national security, that the aspiration and the execution are often at odds. Yeah. And sometimes people use the language of morality in the pursuit of less than moral ends, questionable ends. America has a history that's mixed, like all countries, and we've used power inappropriately, imperialistically at times. We've also used it to advance human good, to defend liberty, and other things. So, it's a mixed bag because human beings are a mixed bag, and operating in a broken world is hard. But in terms of the aspiration, I think it was very much authentic to Reagan, and it really carried through, and I say defined more or less the Republican Party up until 2016 and Donald Trump. And then there was a break with Trump that's pretty clear.
Let me label a couple of things. First of all, thank you for pointing out what we know as believers. We share a conviction that humans have a sinful nature and a lot of inconsistency. I want to be the best husband and father I can be, and yet I am not always the best husband and father I can be. So politicians get in the same field. But of course, and this has been for centuries, if the dominant ideology that people are operating by is Christian or moral, then people will use that language and those conceptions, whether they personally embrace them or not. They just know, to make my case, I have to use this kind of language, and therefore they will. I'm not accusing them of overt hypocrisy in all cases, but sometimes it's hypocritical, and sometimes it's just a matter of pragmatics. I want to get my position to be adopted and acted upon, and I know how to persuade people, and that's to use moral language, even if personally I'm not deeply moral.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's a very important insight. I'd add to it, which is, I'd say in my experience, and it's something I think we all struggle with, which is we embrace views, whether they're political, cultural, or otherwise, or even within the church on doctrinal issues, that we believe are biblical. And in fact, they may not be. They may be the product of dozens of different things that we're not even aware of. The era in which we live, family of origin, the people who've shaped us, the books we've read,
right?
The
recent experiences.
The experiences we've had, the frameworks through which we view. I think most Christians that I know would sincerely want to be followers of Jesus, but I think what happens a lot of time is that is subordinate to sort of pre-existing core identities, and we tack on scriptural verses and scriptural doctrines or scriptural or theological insights to ratify what we already believe. So it's a sense of kind of confirmation bias. So it's tricky ground. You can use the language of morality, you can use the Bible, but the Bible is such a diverse book, 1,300 years, more than 40 authors, Hebrew Scripture, New Testament. You can validate just about anything you want. So then the issue becomes discernment and wisdom. which is what does any particular moment in time call for? And if you're a follower of Jesus, a person of the Christian faith, how does my faith inform that moment? And it's not that you can pull a book, even the Bible, off the shelf and say, this is what I should do. At least it's not always the case.
Yeah, right. The old saying is every heretic has his verse, which then, of course, means that everyone who has a viewpoint, which doesn't mean they're all heretical, of course, but anybody can pull a verse out of the Bible and say, see, it proves this, and it may or may not. And of course, there are things that the Bible assumes that doesn't explicitly state. You point out in Wealth and Justice, I think I couldn't agree more that the Bible doesn't advocate explicitly that there is such a thing as private property which should be protected, but the very law, thou shalt not steal, implies that there is such a thing as personal property. And so you have to look not only at particular statements, but at the entire conceptual framework of the Bible and try to apply the great scope of biblical teaching to an issue at hand. I do want to switch to something real quick for a couple of minutes. This is a Faith and Work podcast, as you know, Pete. People sometimes wonder what other jobs are actually like. And to work at a think tank, that sounds like maybe you just sit around and think all day, and your job is to think, which of course is true, but it's not the entirety of your job. I'm just going to say, you write a lot for any number of journals, magazines, newspapers of great respect. Is that a side gig for you? Is that a necessary outworking? What's it like to work at a think tank? And are you obligated to go on TV, or is it just nice that you do? Give us just 3 minutes for curious people. What's a week in the life of Pete Wehner, think tank man?
Yeah, sure. I know. Happy to do it. The answer to the question depends in part on what your role is in the think tank, right? If you're a president of the think tank, that's one thing. You may be organizing in an entire year. These are the events we want to do. These are the people we want to interview. These are the books we want to highlight. These are the initiatives that we want to take. These are the conferences we want to host. That would be in one category. You may be a communications person in a think tank where your sole job or your main job is to try and get out the word, whether it's on social media or elsewhere. You might be a public policy expert, like a friend of mine, James Capretta at the American Enterprise Institute, who focuses on entitlement programs. So that's your beat, and you write
a niche where you're an expert.
Exactly,
but you're a senior fellow. What does that mean? How's that different from? Does that mean you get to do whatever you want because you're senior?
Well, yeah, it's no. I mean, senior fellow is a common title. I have a tremendous amount of latitude. My own situation is that I am not institutionally responsible for organizing events like the president of the Trinity Forum, Sri Harder, is a close friend and terrific talent and wonderful person. For me, it is primarily writing. So I'm a contributing writer for The Atlantic, where I write most often several times a month. And then I'm also a contributing opinion writer for the New York Times, where I write as well. And I actually have a theology series in the Times.
I've noticed.
Which has its own interesting background. But, I've done interviews with, I think, 5 theologians and writers: Richard Hayes, Marilyn Robinson, Nick Walderstorff, Rowan Williams, N.T. Wright. These are 7,000-word interviews on theology. So primarily for me, it is writing that I do, but I do television, what you would expect, podcasts, like we're doing one, and an array of other things. So I'm given a wide latitude too. I can, both at The Atlantic, the New York Times, I can write on just about anything that I'd like. I always check with my editors. I have 2 great editors. One's Aaron Redica at the New York Times. The other's Yoni Applebaum at the Atlantic. So for a person of my interests, I couldn't design many jobs that would be better or more fulfilling than the ones.
If I may say, you're a terrific writer.
Well, thank you.
I think that you articulate in a crisp manner, which is necessary for publications like Atlantic and New York Times, in a crisp, well-defined way, and you're just extremely readable as well as deep. So I'm grateful for your work. That's why you're on my podcast, because I have been reading your work for years, and then I found out that we have mutual friends. Let me change over to what it means to be a conservative. So to be direct, you're a conservative, I'm a conservative, but you are possibly the most articulate, maybe the best known, most widely published conservative critic of the current administration, especially the president, not everybody within. And it's not that you have personal animus, you just think there are mistakes that are occurring. I don't want to go into that much. I've had people who love Donald Trump on this program, anything but critics of Mr. Trump, President Trump. But I want to explore the concept of what it means to be a conservative. And I sometimes say, and I'll let you decide if this makes any sense or not, that I'm too conservative. They'll say, hey, Dan, who are you voting for? You're voting for so-and-so for president or governor. And I'll say occasionally, I'm too conservative to vote for that Republican, by which I mean there's not enough of what I construe conservatism to be in that person's makeup. And I'm just going to run through my conception very quickly, 90 seconds. A sort of Edmund Burke, whom I read, years ago as an undergrad, and various other people. So his conception, which is widespread, is that a conservative believes in limited power of the state and wants to honor mediating structures. That's a word you use, a concept you use, the family, the church, civic organizations of various kinds, including hiking clubs or motorcycle clubs, whatever. Number two, existing institutions and customs embody long experience and wisdom and should be heeded because they often have developed over a period of centuries from collective wisdom. Therefore, we should be skeptical of revolution. We're always open to reform, skeptical of revolution, and skeptical of central planning because one person can't know enough. And wisdom of the centuries versus the wisdom of this person right now, or this extremely small group because of the need for epistemological humility. We don't know enough. That's big number two. Number three, there's a total of five. Then change should be radical but not revolutionary. Radical meaning coming from root principles that are then slowly worked out with teams over time unfolding as opposed to instantaneous overthrow. And for example, the death of slavery. The fourth, connected to those, is a multi-generational outlook, which includes respect for the past, which I've already mentioned, but also concern for the next generation. One of my ongoing spitting in the wind kind of interests is the national debt and what we're doing to our children, grandchildren, and their great-grandchildren, hamstringing them, quite possibly, economically. You can think of the creation care as well under that rubric. And number five is then deep respect for foundational texts, which as believers means the Bible, its authority, but also deep respect even if the Constitution isn't authoritative personally in the same way. It's authoritative for a nation, the Constitution, as well as longstanding laws. So that's my conception. And of course, behind that all is character, that is to say, humility, respect for others, constant acknowledgement that I don't know everything. That's what it means to be a saint, to be a conservative. To me, I said saint because the rejoinder that people give is, hey, you're asking for a saint. We're not electing saints. We're not electing Boy Scouts or pastors. We need people to get things done. So that's my view. Comment as you would and add and subtract.
Sure. And the comment would be, I think that's a very nice description. It's one that resonates with me. You clearly thought about and studied political theory, political philosophy, and I think you have a very good grasp of conservatism, and a lot of what draws you to conservatism is what's drawn me to it. You mentioned Edmund Burke, who, depending on whom you talk to, would be considered sort of the founder of modern conservatism, was obviously a huge figure when he wrote on the French Revolution, but also wrote on aesthetics and many other things. I think the way that I approach it would be, I don't know, maybe to simplify things, would be three kind of categories. I would say there's dispositional, temperamental conservatism. I'd say there's philosophical conservatism, and there's conservatism when it comes to public policy. And those are interrelated, I think, but they are different domains. So dispositionally, some of the things that you mentioned, which is epistemic humility, and a belief in the importance of human experience, and aversion to dogmatism, the idea that you adjust to real-world circumstances, and that certain frameworks, certain theories, certain doctrines that you have may be too neat and clean in the abstract, but in reality, it's not. I'd say that Burke, Michael Oakeshott, and many others would have something of an aversion to just abstraction, belief and reverence for tradition without being wed to it. As you said, a disposition and tropism toward reform, but not revolution, for the reasons that you explained. Then philosophically, the things that you talked about, respect for the rule of law, limited state, the importance of mediating institutions, the small platoons that Burke wrote about.
What does that mean, small platoons? What does that mean?
The little platoons, the associations, bowling clubs, Bible studies, those kinds of things. That it's a sort of Tocquevillian view. When Tocqueville did his critique of America in the 1800s, he was from France, of course, and these associations that he said were so characteristic.
So he marveled at them.
He really did. It wasn't exactly a foreign concept to Europe, but it was something that was not nearly as rooted in European way of life as it was America, and he did. It was a wonder for him. And then for conservatives, the culture, civic culture, care about your political culture, virtue, honor, appealing to the better angels rather than the worse angels, knowing that human beings are a mixed bag, and that different people, different leaders, different moments can bring out the best and the worst. And you really need to pay attention to the culture and the formation of character, because if you lose that, you can lose everything. And then there's public policy. And the public policy would be in the realm of things like crime, education, welfare, national security. And then there's public policy, and that can be a whole range of issues: crime, education, welfare, national security, the Global AIDS Initiative, USAID, soft power, hard power, what tax policy is, what spending policy is. So all of those things, I think, conservatives think about themselves and often place themselves more or less in one camp rather than the other. But if one were to say, what does it mean to be a conservative? That's how I tend to think about it.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. So we're having a fairly political, this podcast is sometimes more popular and sometimes less. We're probably in the less popular mode. So I'm just to make sure I label a couple things for our listeners. Soft power would be things like helping Africa with AIDS problems and medication. So in other words, just loving people, caring for people, developing proper forms of loyalty because of actual help rendered, as opposed to hard powers, troops, or the threat of troops.
Marshall Plan in American history would be an example of soft power that came after World War II to rebuild Europe.
Redeveloping the nations that were hampered, crushed, devastated by war.
Exactly. And the Global AIDS Initiative, helping the African continent by President Bush, would be another classic example.
Right. And on this podcast, we had a woman named Ann Reitzema, who's in that field, a dedicated Christian, and has seen her budget slashed quite a bit in the last while, and laments not only loss of life, I mean, she was saving a lot of lives physically, but also loss of genuine projection of love toward people from this nation outward.
Yeah, I could imagine that. That the Global AIDS Initiative that was started by President Bush saved about 26 million lives in the African continent, and to decimate, to shutter USAID, and to essentially cripple PEPFAR. There are hundreds of thousands of people who are likely to die, and probably a lot more than that because of just those actions.
Yeah, defunding. I want to make sure to say another word about mediating structures, why they're so important. I don't know about you, but one of my avocations is hiking. And hiking clubs have a lot of influence. I mean, America has thousands and thousands and thousands of miles of trails over our beautiful land. And it's not, most of the trails are not set up by any government venue. It's set up by hikers and also maintained by hikers. I mean, you can be at 12,000 feet and run into a bunch of people with saws. You say, thanks for your work. And they say, hey, well, you want to join us? We're here every Saturday cleaning up the trail. Oh, I'm only here once a year, but I appreciate it. So that's a mediating structure. And cooking clubs, which can help people eat better. You can pass all kinds of rules about nutrition or guidelines about nutrition, but cooking clubs can also change nutrition and reduce waste is probably as efficiently as anything else. So that's what a mediating structure is, and it comes out of this idea that we share, that there's more than the individual and the state. And the state has extremely limited capacity to regulate, but even less ability to encourage people to live well. This somehow, several things that you mentioned lead me to your book, Wealth and Justice. I already said I love that short book. It does have character formation as a major theme.
Yeah.
Not formation before someone gets into public office, but formation through the right system of government. Certainly also humility about the capacity of government to accomplish things, and a belief that it's actually individuals working as individuals, but also together in corporate settings and work settings that get things done. But there's an extremely potent idea you have. I want to make sure we talk about it. And that is that the view of human nature dictates, or maybe dictates is a little bit too strong, but certainly strongly pushes toward one system or another. And I'm just going to use your concept, and that is that if we believe people are flawed but perfectible, we're going to go in the direction of the Enlightenment and communism and socialism. If we get the system right, we can almost be perfect, potentially, and sin and abuse will disappear. If we believe we're flawed but fatally so, we tilt toward totalitarianism. That is to say, the worst thing we can have is chaos, Hobbes and others, as you point out. It's better to have a strong man than to have no man. And if he's brutally suppressing, it's so much better than chaos, because people are fatally flawed. And chaos will erupt unless we have strength quashing it. Third view, which is, of course, the Christian view, is that we're flawed but capable of growth. Not perfectible, but capable of moving in the direction of virtue or godliness or holiness, we would say as Christians. And that leads to the market economy and to democracy, or if you don't like the word market economy, capitalism. I like market economy better, but market economy or democracy, which doesn't believe people are essentially good. It means people can do things that are good, and that evil can be reined in and good can be promoted. That's what you say in the book. I would love for you to expatiate upon it however you wish, because it's a rich concept and important to us, I think.
Sure, no, happy to do it. Well, you laid it out well, and it's at the beginning, really at the beginning of the book, where we talk about, I think it was a Walter Lippmann phrase that said at the core of every social or political structure is a certain view of human nature, and I think that's right. And the one that you described, that you mentioned, is the one that I think aligns with the view of human nature as taught in the Scripture, not only in the Scripture, which is that people are capable of virtue and vice. And that was a view that very much informed the American founders, of whom James Madison was one of the most important. He's known as the father of the Constitution. And so there was the Declaration and Jefferson and inalienable rights, and then there's the charter, the governing charter, and that's the Constitution, and that was really the handiwork of Madison. And he said in Federalist 51, I think, Federalist Papers were a series of essays written by Hamilton, Jay, and Madison to make the case for the Constitution when it was being debated. And he said, if men were angels, government wouldn't be necessary. But men aren't angels, and so government is necessary. And that aligns, I would say, with Romans 13 and the teachings of Paul to some extent. So you take that and you say, okay, well, that's the way human nature is. What do we do in light of it? How do we create structures, political, cultural, economic, and other, that maximizes the chance for the virtuous side to come out and for the good to be achieved, the common good, as we were talking about earlier? And what steps do you do to try and mitigate the worst? How do you prevent awful things from happening, given the propensity of human nature to go in a bad direction? In the case of the United States, what Madison and the others came up with was checks and balances, separation of powers, division of power. And what had informed him, and I think it's still the key insight, is the danger of authoritarian or dictatorial rule. And so what you have to do is disperse power and have checks on power, hence the three branches: legislative, judicial, and executive, of which, for the founders, Congress was the most important today the executive, the presidency is the most important. So
most important in the sense of most powerful.
Well, the most powerful and therefore the most important.
Yeah. But you're not making a value statement when you say most important.
No.
You're describing the way things are, not the way you wish they should be.
And my own view is we'd be better off if actually Congress, the legislative branch, asserted more of its power. One of the remarkable things to see in the last decade, several decades, is the degree to which Congress has given up even their own interest, members of Congress. But the insight, I think, is still true. And I think when America faces leaders who have more authoritarian tendencies, the wisdom of what the founders came up with makes sense. When you don't fear that, it can create frustrations. People say, look, why don't you have a system of government like Parliament, which is just majority rules?
You can get more done. I mean, the great critique of the American system is it's impossible to get anything done.
I think the American system is at its best and is most important at the moments in which there's an effort to centralize power. And as I said, there's an effort toward authoritarianism. I think our system of government is set up to, if not stop it, at least to mitigate it better than others. But again,
let me try a concept on you real quick. So you've used the word abdication. The contrary is domination. So we would say that is Congress today, or for 10 years, has been abdicating power. And that's a real problem. It's the more common problem, maybe. That's my view, pastorally speaking. And in my leadership, it's more common that people abdicate power. But the greatest problem is domination, even if it's less common. Does that sound right? Is that a label for what you're saying?
Yeah, I think I think if I understand what you're saying, I agree with it. I think that the law.
Abdication would be the vacuum. The boss who won't lead, the husband who won't lead his family, the leader of the hiking club who won't lead the hiking club. That's more common. Yeah. But it's worse when, even if it's less common, it's worse when someone dominates, controls everything. That's what I'm advocating.
And I think the combination of when there's one person who wants to dominate, and then you have others
who are willing to abdicate,
that want to abdicate power. That's terrible. Now, something has to be said as a caveat, which is it is relevant who the person is that's going to dominate. As a general matter, I would say, domination can lead to real trouble. But if you have a person of the character of George Washington who dominates versus someone who is corrupt through and through, obviously the latter is more challenging than the former. But there's also a truism, an axiom, which is, power corrupts, all power corrupts absolutely. And I think that's worth bearing in mind. And of course, Washington himself had the chance to be essentially a dictator, and in one of the remarkable acts in human history, he stepped aside.
Yeah. So and we didn't really hit on this. We barely touched on the nature of conservatism, but conservatives also tend to vote for the person with the best character, because you never know what issues are going to rise, or not just character, judgment, wisdom, knowledge, considered wisdom, and wise people around them. Because whatever you think you're going to face over the next 4 years or 8 years, you're wrong. Who knows what will arise? And so you need someone who can respond wisely, with knowledge and self-control to whatever emerges.
Yeah, I'd add an important.
You always add caveats. I love it. Go ahead, give your caveat.
And this is an important caveat. I would say that over the last decade or so, that view that conservatives would put character primus inter pares, or certainly at the top.
First among equals, for those of you who know Latin. Yep, go ahead.
That has been inverted.
Yes.
And so and honestly, I think this goes back to some of the struggles of human life, human temptation, which is a kind of tribalism. Mm-hmm. And I think what is true certainly of Republicans, and again, I worked in 3 Republican administrations, I think it's true of Democrats, I think it's true of all of us, which is that we put our tribal loyalties above the qualities that we say that we honor. And so if you took, for example, Republicans, when Bill Clinton, a Democrat, was president and the Lewinsky scandal was unfolding, evangelical Christians, more than anybody else, every day or every other day, was taking a figurative 2x4, saying character matters most. Doesn't matter how the economy is doing, doesn't matter what his policies are doing. You can't have a man with the corrupt nature of Bill Clinton to be president. Now, in Donald Trump.
That was 30 years ago.
Yeah,
or
that was
almost
exactly
27 years, whatever.
And now that has switched, and all of a sudden character doesn't matter, and you hear Republicans making the same arguments the Democrats did to defend Bill Clinton, which is an insight into human nature. And this is its own conversation. We don't necessarily have to go there. I actually don't. I think the case against Donald Trump is a conservative case. So I actually don't think authentic conservatism is represented in the Republican Party anymore.
At the moment, at least.
I think in the past, it was the most amenable home to conservatism, which is why I was a Republican. But I think that's no longer the case, which is part of the reason why I broker with it.
Yeah, we're talking about politics naturally because that's your field, and I invited you. I want to talk about politics, but I want to just expand it out a little bit. Tribalism is not just a political phenomenon.
Absolutely not.
It's an economic phenomenon. It's a workplace phenomenon. So, the hero of the workplace is doing wonderful things, the great creator, innovator, who invented things that are the bread and butter of our organization, is lionized as long as all is going well. But if he's, let's say, invented 5 things and the 6th one is a flop and a lot of money was invested, a lot of people will turn against that person on a dime because the CEO says he lost us a lot of money. And the same person who's praised one minute is vilified, maybe not the next minute, but maybe 6 months later, and people are dying for his attention or her attention, will ghost them because they're out of favor. That's tribalism. The person hasn't changed. The leader of the organization had a switch of attitude, which then everybody around wanted to adopt because that's the person who leads our tribe. The inventor is wonderful, but he's not the CEO. And that can happen in business. It can happen in the church. It can happen in large families. I mean, people don't turn each other in the same way in families, but volunteer organizations, it happens all the time.
Absolutely.
Tribalism is deferring to the leader. I may not be great, but my leader's great. I bask in his shadow. What he says, therefore, is right. And I don't have glory, but he has glory, and I have reflected glory when I'm with my hero. And I'm not going to dare offend him or question him. That's, I would say, close to a universal temptation for humanity. And it's surfacing in politics maybe more clearly than it has for a while.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's no question that our politics is deeply tribalistic. It always has been, but I think it's more amplified now. And I agree with you that the tribalism, that is the affinity, the identity with a particular tribe or group, can have really negative effects on us. It can alter how we shape reality. I mean, think of a simple example, but hopefully it makes the point. If you had kids and they played soccer and you thought about, half the parents on one side of the field, half the parents on the other side of the field, and there's a controversial call that the referee makes, that is against your 9-year-old's team.
Yes.
Why is it that virtually all the parents on your side view what happened on the field?
The ref is brilliant. The ref is a bum.
Exactly.
It all depends on the call.
Right. And it's sincere. I mean, that's the point, right? You begin to see reality through a prism. So people are not being cynical. They're not, some are. I don't think most people are saying, I'm following my leader even though my leader is doing awful things. I think what happens is you're part of a tribe, you're part of a community, you get meaning in that, you're in a kind of echo chamber, and how you perceive reality gets altered by all of those things and many others. And pretty soon, if tribalism is extremely acute, you're living in different epistemic realities. You are seeing the world in a different way. And when that happens in a free society, that's very, very dangerous because debate becomes increasingly
impossible
impossible
or difficult,
because
at
you
least.
can't even agree on a certain fact set.
Yeah, so one of the things that intrigues me, of course, is that in every administration, they're doing a lot of things that are great. And if people were just willing to pause, they would say, of course I agree with President so-and-so or Governor so-and-so when they made this decision. It's very beneficial. I mean, let's say the staunchest opponent of the current administration would probably say, we needed to fix our porous border. And it becomes hard to confess anything that's done that's good. On the other hand, those who may have doubts about their current leader will fixate on that which is good. The economy's better, for example, or we won our most recent conflict. I want to do one more thing. There's one more topic I would love for you to comment on that I think is potent and exceptional, if I may say so. In the book Wealth and Justice, you argue that capitalism or the market economy is not only productive, that is to say, we would say undeniably the most efficient system at lifting people out of poverty and making sure they have food, clothing, shelter, education, medical care. But it also inculcates virtue. And of course, people have often said that capitalism inculcates greed and selfishness. You argue the contrary. And if I can ask you, there's a wonderful distinction you make between selfishness and self-interest. So give us a summary of why you think, I know we're switching gears here, but I love what you said. I think is a great challenge to some misconceptions. Why do you think a market economy promotes virtue, not just productivity?
Yeah, let me bracket it by
Sure.
saying that I do believe that capitalism is the most humane economic system ever created, and I think that's almost beyond dispute. So I'd say it's an empirically provable. It's not perfect by any means, and it has its weaknesses. But I'd say as an economic approach, it is the best. In terms of the virtues that it promotes, and people have been writing about this. For example, when I was a young man, there were people like philosophers like Irving Kristol and Michael Novak and others who made that case. But the argument would have been essentially say that it encourages certain acts, thrift, self-sufficiency, self-reliance, creativity. It puts a premium on ability rather than birth status. It can mitigate envy because there is wealth creation, which leads to wealth distribution. And so if you're in a situation in which everybody has more, even if some people have a lot more, you're above a certain threshold of poverty and need, and so maybe envy is mitigated. But for capitalism to work and to work successfully, it requires certain qualities, certain habits, certain virtues, hard work, and all of the rest.
Diligence, not just sporadic hard work, but persistent hard work.
Exactly. That would be the argument. That isn't to say that capitalism can't or doesn't promote materialism, or can't be exploitative, acquisitiveness. Greed is good, to use a line from a movie in the 1980s, Wall Street. So I wouldn't pretend, and I assume you wouldn't pretend that capitalism doesn't have challenges either. That's just the nature of human systems in a human
beings.
World.
I mean,
yeah, but I do think especially if you're dealing with people who have a tendency to be critical of capitalism, I don't think that they're aware enough of the virtues that capitalism can encourage. Now that requires people to set up a system in which capitalism is honest, because people can use capitalism in ways that there's such a thing as you well know, crony capitalism, and you can rig the system in ways that can be awful. But so yeah, I would say that capitalism, rightly understood, rightly executed, promotes virtues, even though you always have to be aware of the vices that it can promote as well. And the second is that capitalism is worth pursuing because of the good. It's lifted more people out of poverty than any other system in history by a long shot.
Let me just make a couple comments, see what you want to add. One thing that I've read occasionally is that capitalism seems to be the most efficient system because it came along around the time of the Industrial Revolution and the capacity to utilize fossil fuels. And therefore, it just kind of came along at the right time. It's not a system that actually works. Of course, the counter argument is look at all the places that don't have capitalism and do have the access to technology but don't use it, or do have a lot of fossil fuels and are nonetheless impoverished. So I'm just going to say I don't buy that argument that it's happenstance. You make it very clear you don't believe in unbridled or unregulated capitalism, which I think is very important because, again, of human nature being compromised. But that leads me to ask you, would you define for us or explain this lovely distinction you made between selfishness and self-interest? Why is that important?
Yeah, that really goes back to Adam Smith and others who made that distinction. I think probably Adam Smith is the most important. He was a philosopher and was a great champion, Wealth of Nations and all the rest. And selfishness, the connotation of it is it's all about the self, and it's all about the self at the expense of others. Self-interest is what it sounds like, which is you are taking actions that are in your interest, but it can lead to acts of altruism. It can lead to advancing the moral good. And that goes back to the earlier conversation we had, which is you have to take human nature as it is. And to deny that people are driven by self-interest is to deny reality. And if you try and set up a system that requires people to sublimate or to push to the side things that are basic to who they are, you're not going to succeed as a system. You can't expect ordinary people to act in extraordinary ways most of the time. And if you're asking people to give up their self-interest, when we see people give up self-interest for the interest of others, those can be glorious moments and beautiful moments, but they're rare moments. And that's partly why we pay attention to them. What you have to do is say, look, people are going to act in their self-interest. Can we channel this in a way that their self-interests are pursued within a system that has rules that govern how they act and what they can do and what they can't do, and in a way in which the pursuit of your interest leads to the interests of the good. So that is how I would distinguish it. How about you? How would you distinguish those two?
Yeah, I love it. And of course, I've read Adam Smith as well. I think this is from Adam Smith. I'm not sure. Maybe it's my own illustration, but selfishness would be making shoes and selling them for as much money as you possibly could to get as rich as you could without care about the shoes. Self-interest would be a desire to make excellent shoes at a reasonable price, but profitable, so that you can give food, clothing, shelter, education, medical care to your own family, and also have return customers because the shoes last and the value is good and they tell their friends. And so you're caring for yourself and your family, and you are doing good for other people. And the market economy promotes that because there are other shoemakers. Communism says we can do central planning. All the shoemakers are going to work for the common good as soon as they get out of a bad system, the capitalist system, which crushes people, and everyone will seek the good of all others all the time. Radically false. But if you have one shoemaker, you're going to have bad shoes at a bad price, probably. If you have 1,000 shoemakers, the competition may help people do the right thing, and maybe even create innovation for better shoes and better shoes as time goes by.
Yeah, that's a great illustration.
Yeah, we agree on a lot of things. It's been a delight talking to you, given very generously of your time. Let me ask you 2 questions you can answer in less than 45 seconds, I hope. If you were to meet somebody who said, hey, Pete, I heard your speech on or your writing on something in some venue. I would love to be to work at a think tank. What would you say? You're walking to your car, you got 45 seconds. What would you say to a young man or young woman who would envision that future for themselves? You should get ready to do that by?
You should get ready to do it by learning to write well, to think well, and to organize your mind and your interests in a way that would advance the cause that the institution you want to be a part of is dedicated to. Think through what is your value added and what can you do to contribute to public conversation, public understanding, public dialogue, and also to approach, if you're talking about political think tanks or cultural think tanks, don't approach that in a cynical way, but have a belief that those things can make a difference because they intersect with justice, and justice always matters.
Last question. What would you like to look back upon in 5 years and say, I thank the Lord that I was able to be some part of this?
Yeah, I'd say that I thank the Lord that I was just a part of actually the political system because I believe in it, and the people that I worked with that I admire very much, President Bush and the Global AIDS Initiative. And then I'd say I'm thankful for the chance to write, especially, most importantly, on matters of faith. You know, I've been given great platforms in which to write about things that I care about, that I think about, that I love, and the chance to write about faith in the public setting has been a real gift.
Yeah, it has. The New York Times and Atlantic have both given you a lot of freedom. You're a good writer. So, Pete Wehner, thank you so much for being a good writer, which is how I met you, through your writing, and consistently appreciated not only your content, but your style. I recommend your work to our listeners, and for being profoundly theological and letting that quietly inform all of your reflection on public life. It's been a delight to have you today.
Thanks a lot. I enjoyed the conversation. I appreciate what you're doing and your faithfulness.
Thank you. Working with Dan Doriani is a production of the Center for Faith and Work St. Louis. We seek to promote faithfulness in the workplace, in education, in discipleship, and in the stories of believers who've applied their faith at work. If you want to put your faith to work and change your corner of the world, visit our website, the Center for Faith and Work St. Louis. Look for faithandworkstl.org. That's one word. We'll help you start a cohort with like-minded believers who also want to practice their faith at work. This podcast is donor-supported. To keep us going, please donate on our website. Maybe more importantly, you can support us by listening, by subscribing, by sharing, by liking us, by posting us on your favorite platform, or go old school and tell a friend.